I spoke with Sarah Kiambi, Director of Migration Policy Scotland. I started by asking her what effect Brexit has had on immigration, particularly in Scotland.
So Brexit meant the end of free movement from the European Union, and that was a really key source of migration, particularly in Scotland. Since then, the UK has seen significantly historically high immigration, but a lot of that immigration is now coming from different countries of origin, predominantly outside the EU.
So that's less migration from the European Union. You say, where are people coming from if levels are historically high?
So the highest inflows currently are coming from countries like India, Nigeria, China, Pakistan and Zimbabwe. So that's a very different picture from before 2020 when EU nationals provided the highest inflows into the UK.
And what effect does that have on the makeup of people across the UK, but again, particularly in Scotland?
So in Scotland, we are seeing really rapidly changing composition of migrants. So who's coming in, where they've come from, and some of the routes that they've come in, those have changed quite significantly. And that means that we need to understand better our new migrant populations and move on from a story that had been for a long time predominantly about those coming from the EU, particularly Central and Eastern European countries.
And what are Scotland's specific needs when it comes to migration?
So for Scotland, like the rest of the UK, the needs are around the economics, so filling gaps in our workforce. But also, particularly for Scotland, are the demographic needs, where Scotland has a far more rapidly aging population, and migration is a really key factor in sustaining population levels in Scotland.
We've been speaking to people in Dumfries and Galloway and Scottish borders where tourism, hospitality, farming are big industries. They say it's difficult to recruit and retain people now because of new immigration rules. Is the pressure more acute in rural parts of the country?
Well, under the new immigration system in the UK, rural areas will find it harder to meet the criteria for labour migrants because salary thresholds are quite high, and we know that wages in rural areas tend to be lower. So I expect in those regions that will be a real challenge. We also know that those industries that you've just mentioned, like hospitality and tourism, were very much reliant on labour that was coming in from the European Union under free movement, where those types of restrictions didn't apply. So I expect that they'll be finding that transition particularly difficult.
And the Scottish Government has said it wants to alleviate some of that pressure by calling for more tailored migration solutions for Scotland. What chance do you think there is of the UK Government agreeing to that?
It's very difficult to tell at the moment where the UK Government will be going in terms of its overall migration policy. There is a white paper imminent, but there are very competing pressures. So we've seen under the new Labour government that there's a bit more space around devolution and decentralisation. Whether that will extend as far as powers over immigration or roles in relation to immigration for Scotland, it's really hard to say. But there's also other competing pressures, particularly the kind of competition between the economic and demographic needs for migration and the political challenges around migration, where politicians are really trying to meet the public's concerns around restricting or reducing migration.
You talked about those political challenges. How difficult an issue is this for Keir Starmer, the Prime Minister?
I think Keir Starmer faces a challenge that most Western democracies are currently facing, which is that we know our demographics are aging, we know that our economies need migration, and we know that our publics are sceptical. And I think politics needs to address the public's concerns, but it also needs to explain to the public immigration in the context of a much fuller argument around social, demographic, and economic needs, and to really build an understanding that we need to make the best of immigration. We're going to need it. It will have its challenges, but we could meet those challenges. And I think that will be a job that the Prime Minister should really try to tackle head on.
Sarah Kiambi, thank you very much.